So we're looking at the last painting or last art piece really from Unit 3, and it is called the Tete from Marriage a la Mode. And tete-a-tete means face-to-face or head-to-head, and I'll get into Marriage a la Mode when we are talking more about context. So this is a painting that was done in 1743, so we're almost smack dab in the middle of the 18th century. And it is by an English artist named William Hogarth, who is famous for his satires. So satirical art, meaning you're using humor to make an important point about usually something in society. And that's definitely what this painting and series is doing. So taking a look at context, again, just to emphasize that this is part of what is a 6-painting series. And the topic of these paintings is marriage, like from the beginning of an introduction to the tragic end that the paintings show. And I'll kind of leave that for you to look at if you're interested and not give it away too much. But again, the series is called Marriage a la Mode, and a la mode is kind of a reference to something fashionable, something that doesn't last. It doesn't have that staying power because it's not really based on anything authentic. And so right there, Hogarth is choosing a title that suggests something about the quality of this marriage. And I already gave you the date. But an important thing to mention in terms of date is that this is the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, which again is in the 1700s or 18th century. And what's happening here that is significant is that you have this growth of a wealthy middle class. They have enough money and interest into purchasing art. And not only that, but they're starting to challenge and replace the aristocracy in terms of position and power within society. So you have the established aristocracy that is, long-term established families who have been in power and wealthy for generation after generation. Now they are threatened by these newly rich families, these merchant families, who maybe are the first generation to ever have money within their family. So it's these two kind of contrasting types of people coming together. And they're coming together through marriage. And so that's what Hogarth is pointing out, a marriage based on economics, not based in love. So the merchant family is getting something from this marriage, and then the aristocratic family is getting something. But what's lost in the whole process is what marriage really should be based on to be lasting, and that is love. So that, think of it as the wife. Well, I'll get to that actually in a second. So let's just look at this first. I'm getting ahead of myself. So what you're looking at here is something else in part of the story of Hogarth, is that, he did the paintings, so 6 paintings, and then he decides to make his art a business as well, because there's this growing market for art, because now you have a merchant class who can afford it. He decides to turn his paintings into prints. And so the paintings of Marriage a la Mode are turned into, and he makes these metal plates and prints, and he can make copy after copy after copy of all 6 paintings. Very difficult to make multiple copies of a painting if you're continually painting them, so it's much more economical for him to make these prints. And he'd sell them for what was like a shilling a piece. And people, especially the middle class, would buy them because in part it's poking fun at the aristocracy, and that would be quite appealing to this merchant class. So not only does the art piece show Hogarth's talent and his mind, being a great satirical artist, it also shows him as a businessman and, thinking ahead to who is his audience, who's going to buy the art and how can I best get it to them to get the message out that I want to get out, but also make a buck and or a shilling and or a lot of shillings. And that's what he did. So again, paintings come first and then a whole bunch of prints to mass produce and sell. So here is a close-up of the painting Tete. And the title of this particular painting within the series does mean head to head or face to face. And I have to think it's referencing the couple here, the husband and wife. Now, it's kind of a crack up, but Hogarth has named the wealthy family, the aristocratic family, the Squanderfields, because they've squandered their money away. They've basically lost most of their money. As society has changed, the aristocratic families have found it difficult to maintain their extravagant lifestyle, but they try really hard and start losing all their money. So Lord Squanderfield, his son is on the right in the chair. His son, little Lord Squanderfield, gets married to a wealthy merchant's daughter. And so she is the female in the image. And so what they get, and this is what I was starting to talk about before, and I thought it would be too soon. The wife now here, she gets a title. She's marrying into the Squanderfield family who has a title. She becomes a lady. And the aristocratic family, what they get from this marital arrangement is money and access to the merchant's money. So that's the benefit, title and money. So, what kind of marriage is Hogarth saying that this kind of arrangement produces? Well, it's not a very good one. And the husband, Lord Squanderfield Jr. here, he's sitting, it definitely looks like he has not slept all night. He's still dressed, in his hat and overcoat, slumped in a chair. And there's a dog, and I'll show you a close-up of the dog, and we'll talk about the dog in a minute. But the dog is near him for a very particular reason. There's a sword on the carpet in front of him, and across the table there is his wife, whose body language is one of relaxation and something that suggests an unladylike behavior that was going on while her husband was away. On the other side, or like near the left-hand side of the image, you have who's got the best eye roll in art history, I have to say. That is their accountant, and he has a lot of bills. He has a ledger in his under his arm that he's keeping track of all the finances, and he's got his hand raised up, eye roll, just had it with their behavior. I think he's the representation of Hogarth's attitude about this kind of marriage, just one of being fed up, disgust, and recognizing that it's not a good match. The home that they're in, this domestic space, is definitely one of excess. There's classical elements all around, luxury materials suggested in the columns, in the arch, in the paintings that exist, in the ornate frames and ceiling. I think everything here suggests luxury. But there are some things within the painting. Let me check something here. Yeah, I'll get to that. That suggests like a combination of what the merchants brought to the marriage, like these new kind of so-called tacky images and objects that show no taste. And then the objects that the aristocracy have that represent old values that they really don't live by too much. By the way, it's raining like a ton right now as I'm recording this, so if you hear something, it's rain. Okay, moving on. So I'm pointing here to a couple of things I wanted you to see. So the broken sculpture, there's a bust sculpture on the mantle and these other collection of sculptures. But that larger bust portrait has a broken nose that's been like glued back on. These people are careless. They don't value things. They value wealth, status, money, and they're not in the marriage for the right reasons. Behind all those sculptures is a painting called Cupid Among the Ruins, which I think is just Hogarth subtly suggesting that the marriage is in ruins. That almost marriage in general, not just this one, but marital arrangements in general that are going on during this time are kind of a big old mess. So that's, I think, because people aren't marrying for love. And then I just wanted to point out, because we had talked about in Venus of Urbino, on the left, I have the arrow pointing to it, you see one of those kind of what would be considered kind of a more lewd painting is halfway hidden by a curtain. And so that's kind of how the Venus of Urbino piece would have been seen in the Duke of Urbino's, dressing closet or his wardrobe suite in his home. And if you just look around the room, I mean, honestly, chair knocked over, books on the ground, things are broken, chairs, the guy in the background who's mopping his head, he's probably having to clean up everyone's messes. It's a life of excess, a life that shows no care, and it's just entering this arrangement for the materialistic benefits and not for true, authentic love. And then here is a close-up just to show you a little bit of, some fun things here. The woman whose bodice, her like top is undone. She's sitting in a way that would not be considered ladylike. She's got a mirror in her hand that probably is being used to signal to a lover who's most likely just left the room when her husband has come back home from his night out. And that goes back to the dog then. The dog is there sniffing a bonnet, a woman's bonnet. Well, his wife has a bonnet on, so the implication is that he's been out with other women at night. And remember, dogs, this is our third, a symbol of loyalty and lust. And both apply here. He's been quite disloyal. And in fact, on his neck, you see that round circular dot or disc. That is a telltale sign of a sexually transmitted disease, most likely syphilis. And in fact, that's going to play a role in the tragedy that comes up later in other paintings in this series of 6. So even though these two are married, they are seeking their companionship elsewhere. This is a marriage of convenience, a marriage of gain. Again, title for the wife, and then access to money for the husband. So I would say for this particular piece, this series, it's definitely a narrative series. That is one. There we go. So the Marriage a la Mode is a narrative series. This particular tete-a-tete is a domestic scene. So that's another function, is domestic. I would say social commentary is another function that you could use. And then maybe economic as well, because Hogarth is profiting off of the sale of his prints purposefully, and also sending that message, and that's why I put social commentary there as well for function. And then for formal quality, because we're making prints here, we're emphasizing, by sending out this message to a lot of people, we're emphasizing the narrative that he is sending. We're emphasizing this social commentary of, the marriage based on convenience and mutual benefit isn't good. Ultimately, it will end in disaster. So I think that is definitely one. And I also like contrast for formal quality. You have a contrast of all these classic, old school, objects and paintings within this scene that suggest the aristocratic wealth. And then you have these new objects on the mantle, the fireplace mantle, that are considered a little bit more tacky. And that would be a nice contrast to this newly rich merchant class. And then also a contrast of the couple's behavior versus the servant's behavior and attitude, I think is a nice contrast as well. So that's a really fun piece, kind of a lighthearted piece, yet still, there's humor, but there's still a serious message to be sent here. And that is typical of William Hogarth. And so there we go. That's Tete Tete, the singular painting here from the series called Marriage a la Mode.